Welcome back to another episode, a live episode of Retirement Intel. Today, we've got a great show for you. Really, I'm going to dig into the craziness of yesterday. I mean, who didn't have fun with all the volatility yesterday? We're going to talk through some retirement savings rules and some changes around retirement savings that you need to know if you're going to, if you've got any sort of savings in a retirement account. We're going to dig through all those. We're going to cover the U.S. national debt and how it impacts your retirement. And lastly, we're going to finish up with some ways that your smartphone can make your life easier. So buckle up, dig on in, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and welcome to the show. I'm Jonathan Rankin. For those, if this is your first show that you're watching, thanks for being here. This is episode number 2, week 2. We come here every single Tuesday at 4 p.m. Central Time. So thank you for being a part of this. I'm excited to be here. And yeah, yesterday was a crazy day. It was a massive sell-off in the global markets. It started off in Japan, and then from there, this was on the heels of an already hotter than expected unemployment data from Friday. So you have unemployment that was higher than expected. You had the huge sell-off in Japan because of this yen carry trade that you might hear a lot about. And then we hear that Warren Buffett sells his largest chunk of Apple stock and is sitting on his largest cash that he's ever done. On top of that, we've got worries that the Fed is behind the 8 ball when it comes to dropping interest rates. So there's a lot going on in the investment world. And, obviously, if you're saving for retirement, that's one thing that, can impact your long-term retirement goals. But, it's not everything. And so, there was so we're going to dig in. There is a chart that is probably one of my favorite charts that I've come across over the past couple of days. As I've really thinking about what's going on in the investment worlds, in the retirement world, I came across this chart, and there's always a reason to sell. And I look at this, and I remember going through a lot of these reasons. And the latest reason is this yen carry trade that you're probably hearing a lot about because the Bank of Japan increased their interest rates for the first time, just out of nowhere, out of the blue. And it wasn't anything that was telegraphed. And so people who were borrowing Japanese yen were buying risk assets across the globe. And so the moment that the interest rate started to go up, they had to liquidate and just have this mass liquidation that kind of fled throughout the entire globe. Now, here's the thing. When I look at these different dates and, going back all the way to, 2007, 2008, when I started in this business, there's always been something going on. There's a few things that, I think about, and I remember conversations with people throughout these different stages, whether it was we're going into World War III when Russia invaded Ukraine, or I remember Brexit was a huge deal. The amount of people that were talking about this is going to collapse the EU, and it's going to be this massive, issue that's going to create this global ripple effect. The downgrade of the U.S. debt, and we're going to talk a lot more about the U.S. debt coming up here, but that was a big one. When the U.S. debt ever gets downgraded, we hear a lot of news about how this is going to change the U.S. for for the future, and we're going to be so negatively impacted, and it's going to cause this massive depression. And then I always think about there's always going to be, and there always is news that's going to be sell worthy. But the reality is, if your retirement and your financial goals were ruined yesterday because of the Japanese yen carry trade, then there was an issue to begin with in the very start of it. The way that you were positioned, the way that your portfolio was built and your financial goals were planned for, there was something going on from the very start of that. It wasn't done in the right way, because no one major event should have this massive impact. Obviously, a drawn out economic cycle with a bear market and recession, that could obviously impact your goals. But a one-day sell off in the global markets, that shouldn't be one thing that's going to make your entire retirement goals or your entire financial goals unsustainable. And so when you think about how did yesterday go for you, if it didn't go so well, and it create a lot more nerves, or it was just it just made you not feel good throughout the day as you watch the markets fall, then that's something that you want to address, as we continue to move forward. Address that in days like today as the market's up. The market was up slightly. Granted, it did pull back towards the end of the day, but it did end up. So it's not like we're in this, massive 2008 sell-off, but it's something to readdress. Go back to your financial goals and figure out, am I allocated the right way? Should I be changing the way that, my portfolio is allocated because of how volatility made you feel? Because at this point, it's always important to make sure that you can stomach whatever the market's going to deliver. Because there's going to be times where we go through a period of, higher volatility or longer sell-offs than just a few days. And if you're retired or you're thinking about retirement, you've probably experienced that already. And so, as we go through those, the last thing you want to do is start making some knee-jerk reactions in the middle of that volatility. You want to make sure that your portfolio can withstand any of those downturns. And really, it's not necessarily the portfolio, but that your emotions and your behavior can withstand the volatility that your portfolio goes through. Because there are going to be times, and 2022 was a perfect example, where pretty much everything went down. Bonds went down, stocks went down. It was a really tough year. It was one of I think a handful of years where we saw both, a bear market in stocks and bonds. So it was a really tough year. And so there are going to be years where things are down, but it's going back to, how did that make you feel? And what can you do to position yourself to make sure that you're not making these knee-jerk emotional reactions during any sort of period of volatility? So I like to bring this up. We'll try to start off every one of these with a kind of a chart of the week, just something that is going to help paint the picture for what's going on in the investment worlds, but also how you should be thinking about these things, within your own retirement portfolio. And if you haven't, if yesterday was a lot for you and you don't really know where to turn, use the link in the description below. A member of our team will be happy to talk with you. And really where we start is we build out that financial plan first. We go through that financial planning process and then go through the portfolio construction. Whereas a lot of people, they'll invest just to invest without necessarily the goals in mind. And so we like to start with that goal approach and then create that customized portfolio from there. So, yesterday was a lot. My guess is that it's probably not the last day of volatility that we're going to see, especially with this being, a pretty crazy election year. So I think it's time to kind of buckle up and get ready for some enhanced volatility. But, it's to be expected. When you're investing, there's always going to be volatility. And so, I just want to cover that, go through that slide just because, put it in perspective that there's always going to be some news, some headline, something that's going to, cause that uneasiness or, some sort of volatility in your portfolio. So, kind of move on from there. I want to touch on some of the retirement savings new rules. So, with the Secure 2.0 that came out a couple of years ago, the IRS, they finally came out with their final regulations on this. And I know I covered this in a separate video and really highlighted the inherited IRA rules, but there were also additional rules that were changed and will be changing over the next couple of years that are important for you to be aware of. So one of the big ones was that, starting in 2026, if you are over 50 years old, you're eligible for the catch-up contributions. However, starting in 2026, if you make over $145,000, you're now going to have to make those catch-up contributions into Roth accounts. So this is a pretty big deal because now it takes away the ability for some of that tax planning for those that are higher income earners. Typically, they don't want to contribute to a Roth because they're at that highest tax bracket already. Now, on the positive side, where this really does help is that, what I've seen over the past couple of years is that people who are entering retirement, as of late, they don't have as much in Roth accounts as they wish they had because, during the savings years, it's always tough to contribute to a Roth account because it's after-tax dollars. It's hard dollars going into those accounts. Whereas when you're contributing pre-tax, you get that tax deferral. You get the ability to let that compound for a long period of time, and it feels good in the moment. But now, as you're entering retirement, it's the opposite. A lot of people think of, well, I wish I had something I can get some tax-free income from, and that's where the Roth comes into play. So, this kind of forces that direction. But it is something to keep in mind if you are, over the age of 50, or going to be in 2026 and you're in that higher income earning bracket, you're now going to be forced to make contributions into the Roth. And, on top of that, that annual income amount is going to increase. It's going to be indexed to inflation. So it's something that will continue to go up. So as as your earnings likely go up, so will that. And, it doesn't impact, Roth IRAs. It's not going to impact, your spouse's income doesn't have any impact on this change, but it's just something that if your individual income is over that amount, it's going to have to go into a Roth account. From there, the next update is that there is no longer RMDs from Roth 401ks. Now, this may be confusing because you might be thinking, well, Jonathan, I've got a Roth IRA. There's never been an RMD in that account. Well, that's true, but in Roth 401ks, they actually did have mandatory distributions because it was within that 401k account. And my guess is that, this was something from a record keeper standpoint. So whether it was, wherever your 401k is held, there are probably some issues around separating those dollars and creating the accounting to make sure there were no RMDs. But now there's not going to be any of that issue. They're going to align the regulations as they are with Roth IRAs. This is something that, in my opinion, should have been done a long time ago. So they're finally getting around to it. So that's some good news there. Next one, so spousal beneficiaries. This really applies if there's an age difference between the spouse and the beneficiary. So if you're married and your spouse is significantly older or younger than you, what happens is if the older spouse passes away and the younger spouse now inherits that spouse's retirement account, it's going to be treated as if it's the younger spouse for RMD purposes, which is a huge benefit because now, the RMDs don't have to be taken until, the deceased spouse would have been 73, but, you're also going to be having, the RMD age increase over time to 75. And this allows for this huge potential for continued tax deferred growth. And this really is going to be a benefit for, like I said, those that are, have a spouse that is significantly younger than them. If they inherit your account, they don't have to start taking distributions right away, even if you were subject to RMD. So it's a very big benefit. It's something that probably shouldn't have been done a long time ago, but at least from a spousal standpoint, they should have more regulations and rules that that really help, just like this one. And I think this is a great change that they're making. Reduced penalties for RMDs. This is a big one. So before, if you were to miss a required minimum distribution, even by 1 day, it was a 50% penalty. Now, it can actually be reduced to 25%. And there's ways that you have to go through, a couple different channels to make sure that you are qualified for it. But you can actually get that penalty down to 10% if you do miss the RMD. So no longer is it this 50% penalty, which was, a huge cost. It's now can go as low as 10%. So really big deal here. I still would try to do your best to not miss an RMD. And especially if you've inherited an IRA, over the past couple of years that's subject to that 10-year rule. There was a lot of concern and questions about whether or not RMDs are required during that time frame. We put out a complete separate video dedicated to that inherited IRA rule. So make sure you check that out. But getting this penalty reduced, big cost saver, big tax saver if you do end up missing an RMD. Starting soon, employer matches can now go into Roth contributions. So once again, this is a great way to start adding some of that Roth dollars to your retirement. The key here, though, is that you will have to pay taxes in that year on whatever that match is. So from a tax planning perspective, just be aware of that. It's a nice way where, that match, because it's not something that goes in your bank account, then you have to see it leave your bank account and go into a Roth account. It's just something that your employer puts in there. It's an easy and default way to start contributing to a Roth if you haven't already. However, that income tax could creep up on you. So it's something that you just want to make sure well in advance that whatever that employer matches, you're going to have to pay taxes on that amount at some point, on that match. So just keep that in mind as you, if you are going to make that change. My guess is it's going to take a little time for employers as well as, plan administrators to catch up and be able to make this, actually applicable, because, there's going to be a lot of tax documents that need to be put out, a lot of changes from a payroll perspective. So my guess is that this is going to roll out, probably a little slower than most people anticipate, but it's something that will be changing. And now you have that ability, especially if you've decided that, you're at let's say, getting close to retirement and you want to put the majority of your contributions into Roth. It was always frustrating that you had to get these matching funds that were in a different format. So now this changes that. It allows you to control, have a little bit more control on where you want the money to go. So I think anytime you get control is more beneficial. It's interesting that they decide to give you more control here, but yet they decide to take away some control if you're earning over $145,000 and doing a catch-up contribution. So there's always that give and take there. All right, so let's switch gears. The national debt. This is something that I've heard about ever since I got in this business. For a long time, people have been talking about the national debt, and when you look at how much the national debt is right now, $35 trillion. I mean, that's a lot of numbers on that page, and that number keeps going up. And so we know this is something that, especially in a political year, that's going to get some headlines. It's going to be talked about. But the question comes down to, is this really an issue that you should care about? Now, I don't want to say care about, but is this an issue that's really going to negatively impact your retirement, your financial goals, and is something that you should be building your portfolio around, worrying about the national debt? And there was a great video by Mike Antonelli, he's a strategist with Baird. He did this video that you can find on YouTube. I'll make sure to link it in the description below, but did a great video breaking down the national debt. And it was a really good video because it puts in perspective, okay, how long have we been worrying about this debt? And he showed some cartoons, and hopefully you're able to take the time to watch, but showed some things from the 18 and 1900s that we were talking about this national debt issue for over 100 years. I mean, this isn't something that's new. It's not like, poof, the national debt got to 35 trillion just out of the gate. And so there's a bad perception of what the national debt is. A lot of people like to equate it to personal debt. You go out and you've got a credit card or a home loan, and you add on a car loan. Now you start feeling some of that pressure of, well, you need to make sure that your income is keeping pace with what that debt is going to be, or what that debt is for you personally. That's not how the U.S. operates. We're not, yes, assets have to rise with debt, but they are rising. We're seeing that with GDP. We're seeing that, just with the asset that the U.S. government has, which is, one, we issue, the currency that the debt is issued in. So we have the ability to print our way out of this. And I know that a lot of people don't necessarily like to think about the U.S. Printing a bunch of money, and there's a lot of misconceptions on whether that's good or bad. But the reality is, it is the reality. We have the ability to do that, which a lot of countries don't. And so then you hear about things like the debt ceiling. These are things that we're going to hear about. Especially, it seems like every year, every couple of years, we always hear about the debt ceiling. The U.S. is going to shut down the government. Well, that's a self-imposed, political constraint. That's a political maneuver that our politicians are doing. That's not something that the international community is saying, okay, well, you guys are taking out too much debt, and we're not going to continue to buy this debt. Because you got to remember, the U.S., we can't go bankrupt. We have the ability to print money. And print the money to meet our obligations. Now, could that be inflationary? Yes, it probably will be inflationary. And, that's where, when you're positioning your portfolio, the goal is to make sure that you're positioned for inflation. But where I see a lot of people who are focused on retirement think about the debt in the wrong way is they look at this and say, well, the U.S. is going to go bankrupt. I should take my money and I'm going to put it all into gold, or I'm going to put it all into real estate, or all into one sort of hard asset. And the reality is that the U.S. dollar is the world reserve currency, and it's still held by the majority of the international community as that world reserve currency. It's the number one currency that's out there. So from a power perspective, it's an extremely powerful tool to be able to print that. And when we think about the thought process of, okay, let me take all my money, I'm going to put it into gold, or I'm going to put it into a house, or whatever it is, I always think about it like this. If you ever have to go to a store, or you have to buy something, and to do so you had to shake off or fleck off a shilling of gold to pay for that, then the reality is none of this matters. None of what we see today as an actual economy matters. It's all gone, because if we had to go back to a currency that is, in coin form or in bar form, then I could tell you that, the money that you had in the bank is gone. The bank's probably gone. Everything is at that point completely changed. It's one of those fears that I see a lot of people worry about that I think can, hopefully be alleviated by thinking through that of what kind of world would we actually be in if we had to use some sort of hard asset as our currency. So it would take a catastrophic thing to get us there. But I do think that we're in a position where, yeah, the US debt does have to change. Something has to happen there. But the reality is, it's not like we're in these dire straits. When you look at the US debt to GDP ratio compared to other developed nations, we're not too bad. We're not too far off. I mean, look at Japan, and obviously Japan just created some ripples over the past couple of days, but we're below the average. And so, yeah, it's not great to see these massive numbers of debt, and at some point, some of the stuff is going to get reined in, but it's a powerful tool, and it's a way that we can utilize something that utilize the asset of debt to build out the infrastructure in our country. So it is something that I think is always going to be on people's mind. It always has been for hundreds of years. This is something that people, they mentioned that video, Andrew Jackson, who's on the $20 bill. He had such a big issue with the US debt. And that's going back to the guy who's on the $20 bill. So I don't think this is going to be something that's going to go away overnight. And the last thing that you want to do is build your entire retirement portfolio for something that is going to continue to happen probably well after we're all gone. And so when we think about the ability that the US government has, I mean, think about the asset and how much would you value the asset to be able to tax the most highly productive economy. I mean, that is just a tremendous value. Now, obviously, as a US citizen, we all don't want to think about this, government coming down and taxing us, extreme amounts just to pay off the debt, but it is an asset that they have, and it's something that they can actually do. And unfortunately, there's nothing that, we can vote with our at the ballots, but that's really all we could do. So they have this asset, that they can tax this highly productive economy in the currency they issue the debt in. They have the ability to print the debt. So when you're building out your portfolio, yeah, you might want to think about, making sure that it's built to keep pace with inflation, built from an inflationary hedge standpoint. Those are ways you can think about it. But, to take your portfolio and do things that are, extreme because of a worry about the debt, you think about how much the US debt has grown over the last 100 years. I mean, it's grown tremendously, but also think about the value of, how much the US economy and the US stock market has grown over that time as well. I would imagine that Steve Jobs wasn't sitting there thinking, well, maybe we shouldn't put out the iPhone because, the US is in a ton of debt, and why would we do that? Or, I'm pretty sure that, Mark Zuckerberg wasn't thinking, let's not, start this Facebook thing because, hey, what, the US debt, we got to focus on that. The economy is still going to continue to grow. People are still going to want to, to grow and spend money, and businesses are going to want to thrive. We are in an economy that is a capitalistic society. And so people are going to be entrepreneurial in spirit and continue to grow. So just think about that as you're building out your investment portfolio, because it's important to make sure that you're keeping things in perspective, especially from a retirement standpoint. The last thing that you want to do is, create such a rigor around your portfolio, or these extreme rules around, within your portfolio that are not allowing for this long-term growth. There's always going to be concerns. We're seeing that live out right now, but we've seen that live out for a long period of time. So, a lot of different things to take away, but check out that video. I think it creates a good perspective on what's going on in the, with the debt and how you should be thinking about it. And then you think about, as I mentioned, during that time, stocks continue to rise over the past 100 years, economy continue to grow. And the last thing that is probably the most important, if you were investing based on the debt, that would be extremely frustrating and underperforming. And you probably saw that if that's something you did. I mean, we talk about, I mentioned gold because a lot of people have this, assumption that gold is a great hedge for inflation. If you look at the actual data, the best hedge for inflation has actually been U.S. stocks. That data goes back, dozens and dozens of years. So it's something that, when you're thinking about constructing your portfolio, the simpler that you can make it, that's based around your goals and not around something like, the national debt, the more successful you're probably going to be, and the less headaches you're going to have, the more, I would say, the more enjoyable that retirement is likely to be. So, but that's enough on the U.S. debt. We can kind of ramble on for a long time on that one, but it's something that I think is important to keep in mind. But I want to switch gears because this is a show about retirement, and part of that retirement isn't just stocks and bonds and financial planning and retirement planning. It's things that can help make your life easier and simpler as you continue to go throughout life, go throughout retirement. And one thing that I saw a great article that kind of listed some smartphone features that not many people are aware of. And I know that as technology continues to advance, it's hard to keep up with everything that all of our devices can do, whether it's our computers, our phones, you name it. And I bet AI is going to change all of that. But it's pretty hard to really think about how all of this stuff can interact with us. So I want to kind of dig through some of these just in case you didn't know. So one of the first ones that I think is pretty interesting is you have the ability to clone a voice. It's a feature that's called the personal voice feature, and it's added to iPhones. It's also there. It is on Android if you do have one of those phones, but it lets you actually duplicate your voice by reading out loud 150 randomized phrases. And it's a process. It takes about 15 minutes, but it works in tandem with other features. So let's say that at some point that you can't talk anymore, some sort of health issue, viral issue, you name it. This allows you to continue to communicate within your own voice. It allows your family to continue to hear your voice. It's an interesting feature that, I'll bet that as we advance with AI, it's going to be something that, at a certain point, how valuable, how nice would it be for, your grandkids or your great grandkids to be able to have a conversation, with you at some point, even if you were unable to speak. The next one is be able to transcribe sounds. So, people with hearing impairments, they might miss things like an appliance beeping or doorbells or voices from another room. And so with this live transcribe feature it's on Google and Google phones and Android phones, and there's also an iPhone feature called live captions. What it allows you to do, it allows you to get these alerts to be aware of what these sounds are. So it'll actually listen to your surroundings and give you an alert of the fire alarms going off, or if the timer that you set at the oven was going off, or if there's people in the other room. So it's a great way, depending on your individual hearing, if if there are any hearing issues, it's something that allows you to at least be able to know what's going on without having to actually listen, if you can't really hear. Then there's the ability to cast your screen. So, phones are getting so big to the point that they're starting to become mini iPads. I mean, but if you don't feel comfortable with carrying around this massive brick of a phone and you still have something smaller, but you want to be able to see it better, you can actually cast your screen to your TV using AirPlay or Google Chromecast and make your screen larger. So as if you're scrolling online or you just want to be able to show somebody some pictures on your phone, you can cast that and make your screen a lot larger. So those are a few features, and the last ones we'll kind of touch on are walk steadiness. This is an iPhone feature. It allows you to assess. What it will do is it'll assess as you're walking around using different algorithms. It'll check your balance, it'll check your coordination, your stability, and it's going to give you a walking steadiness rate. It is either okay, low, or very low. And so it'll help give you an assessment as to, do you need to start looking into getting any sort of assistance so that you can avoid any sort of damaging falls. A big one, especially now with AI, there's so many things that can be that can come up that might look real, but they might not be. And so using the reverse image search within Google, can actually help identify if a photo is AI generated. So if you see something online and it just doesn't look right and you're wondering, okay, is this real? Should I believe this or not? Just put that into Google. You can download the app from your, on whatever smartphone you have, download the app, and within Google, you can actually use an image. You just upload that image. It'll tell you, you can find out whether or not it's legitimate or if it's AI generated. And then the last one that I think is pretty interesting is you can turn your ebook into an audiobook. And so it's a feature it's called Speak Screen, and it can read aloud any text on your screen. So if you're reading a PDF or if you're reading your mail, you can have it, you can have your screen be read to you. So you think of any sort of ebook you have, if you just want to turn it into an audiobook, you can do that through that feature. So just a couple different features that, I know a lot of people aren't aware of. I went through all of these with my family, and I can tell you they were all aware of, only about one, if not, maybe two of them. And so even my wife, she didn't know what most of these things were. So, it's not necessarily the age thing. It's just from a technology standpoint, technology moves fast and it's hard to keep, an understanding on what's going on. So, hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully this was fun. I want to keep doing these, keep coming back every single week. Like I said, Tuesdays at 4 p.m. If you've got any questions, anything on your mind, reach out. You can, schedule some time with a member of our team or myself in the link in the description below. You can reach out to us via email. We're always happy to take your feedback, talk about different topics on the show. If there's anything that's on your mind, share that with us. We're always going to bring you different retirement topics that are relevant to you to help you live a better and happier retirement. And, I appreciate you being here. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.